Thanks for the introduction. I'm Yash. This is joint work with Jack Lerner, ECDSA, and Abhishek for so this is Central ECDSA in China. It was a recipe a couple of weeks ago. So let's consider the situation of our friend Bitcoin Bob. Bitcoin Bob, as the name suggests, has a bunch of Bitcoin on his laptop. The way he uses this is that when he wants to send some money to his friend Alice, he pushes a button on the laptop, uses his key, which is stored on the laptop, to produce a signature. He attaches his signature to the relevant message, and he's able to send money to his friend Alice. Now, let's say that due to no fault of his own, there is some sort of bug in the operating system that he uses, not naming names, and attacker will turn up, break Windows, maybe, and do some sort of cool thing to get his key out. And once the attacker has his key, she's able to basically sign arbitrary messages and drain all of his funds and take all of his money and all of his cool things, which is sad. So what Bob will do is use threshold signing, which is one way of adding a layer of defense against these kinds of attacks, which is to take the key, split it into multiple parts, and put one part on each device so that anytime you want a signature, Bob has to run some sort of protocol between these parties, maybe interactive, to produce a signature. The idea behind doing this is to distribute the risk of compromise across different devices. Right, so roughly the talk is going to be structured when I'm introducing the problem. I spend most of my time just talking about the techniques, and then I'll say a bit about concrete efficiency and comparisons. Right, so the adversary model for this work is going to be that of a dishonest majority, there may be only one honest party. And also we're going to consider a malicious adversary who may deviate arbitrarily from the protocol. Right, so it's constructed in a way by looking at Schnorr, which has a pretty clean structure, defined over an elliptic curve. A secret public key pairs in the form of a random scalar from ZQ and for the secret key, and then the public key is just this point exposed in the exponent. It's an elliptic curve. Signing is quite simple. It involves sampling of nonce, which is of the same format as the secret and public key pair, and then exposing a linear combination of the signed key and this nonce. And the fact that this signature, the S, is just a linear combination of secrets, it happens to be very MVC friendly. What I mean by this is that if you consider a system in which there are two parties that have secret shares of the signed key and an example of the secret share of the nonce, they can compute the secret sharing of the signature just by simple linear operations on their local shares of the secret. And so this yields a pretty simple 3-round four-clutch Schnorr signing protocol, which has been documented in a few different places. We take a couple of rounds to sample the nonce, and then spend another round in just reconstructing a linear combination of the nonce or other shares of the nonce and shares of the secret key that all parties hold. And yeah, just a couple of quick notes. Assuming that we're making black box use of all the underlying things, it seems that this, at least the simplest possible way to do this takes a couple of rounds. And then on top of the 2 rounds to sample the nonce, there's 1 round to reconstruct the signature itself. So this is Schnorr. So Schnorr is great. It's old, which is good in cryptography. The signatures are compact and fast, and of course, it's MVC friendly, as you just saw. But the fact that it was patented early on has been a barrier to its adoption. So while the internet infrastructure that we have is increasingly supporting Schnorr signatures in the form of DSA and so forth, at the moment, ECDSA is still ECDSA, which is the subject of this talk, is more widely supported, to my knowledge. So ECDSA is standardized a while ago, and the point is that it differs from Schnorr just enough so that the patent that stops Schnorr doesn't apply to ECDSA. And this has meant that it's been widespread adoption across the internet. But unfortunately, this has led to some problems for us when we're designing MVC protocols for ECDSA. So the first half of ECDSA is quite similar to Schnorr. We begin by just sampling the nonce. In the MVC context, this means that we can just take the same 2-round sampling for the nonce. The unfortunate part is the second half of ECDSA, which is the combination of the secret key and the nonce. And this is some level of nonlinear array. In particular, looking at this more closely, we see that the secret key and the nonce have to be combined with this sort of multiplicative way, and also the nonce turns up in the denominator. And this is kind of inconvenient to deal with an FEC for secret values. If you notice the RX thing, you can ignore it. This is a public value. And I want to say right off the bat that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to compute this equation in an FEC. Right? This becomes evident when we look at what's arguably one of the most minimal building blocks for dishonest majority MVC protocols, which is two-party multiplication or Oblivious linear evaluation, or call it whatever you want. Essentially, this is a gadget that takes secret inputs from both the parties, alpha and beta, and outputs secret shares C and D such that the outputs C and D add up to the product of the inputs alpha and beta. And already at this level, there's a diversity of ways in which you can instantiate this object. And jumping many steps, let's take a quick look at a snapshot of the status result for ECDSA, or a small subset of the papers for ECDSA. And it's relatively complex in terms of if you're a systems designer, if you're some sort of systems designer and you want to choose some protocol for ECDSA, how are you going to compare these works? There's trade-offs in terms of what multiplication machinery to use, what sort of ground efficiency there is, bandwidth computation, and so forth. Right? So the goal of this work in one way is to give a simple unified protocol so that the only thing that you do as a system designer is pick your poison in terms of what sort of multiplication machinery to use, and then apply a very clean, easy to understand trade-off between bandwidth and computation. Essentially, we just remove the direct. We want to just remove one dimension, which is that of rounds. And that's what we do. We give a 3-round sign protocol that makes black box use of any two-party multiplication protocol. Right? And the cool thing is that we achieve this with basically no overhead. If we get a round compression, this 3 rounds, which is strictly better than any round complexity for ECDSA before this, at no additional cost, no noticeable cost of bandwidth of computation. And what lets us do this is this specific way of rewriting the ECDSA equation to be more AIDC friendly. And the simple consistency check that just ties everything together with, a very straightforward to understand mechanism. We focus on the OP case, so the technique is very generalizable for reasons that I'll get into later. So that's the problem. And it's easy to compare across works in the literature by looking at papers in sort of black box way. Let's see what assumptions are in the theorem, skip to the efficiency section and see what the values in computation are like. This gives you an idea of the footprint of different papers in the literature, but it doesn't really tell you how techniques are evolved, which is something that we want to do in this paper. Right? So in our full paper, we give this kind of qualitative accounting of how different ideas are evolved in this sort of literature, which I'll just say a few words about. Right? So just to begin with, right, just computing K inverse given K, which is something that we need to do for ECDSA, naively is a pretty bad idea because this has a pretty complex arithmetic circuit representation. It's modular inversion operation. So there's a standard recipe in the literature that I guess we sort of retroactively fit into different papers, but we can begin to solve this problem by rewriting the ECDSA equation to be more MPC friendly, and so that we make minimal use of additions and multiplications and don't do things like inversions and other annoying things like that. Next, we need some sort of cryptographic machinery to actually compute our rewritten equation in some secure way. And finally, we need some operations to verify. We need some sort of mechanism to verify that all of these operations are performed honestly. So what do I mean by this? Let's go back to the first paper that I tried to solve that showed ECDSA. This is many decades ago. ECDSA, this is the equation over here. What Lanford and subsequently Gennaro et al. Did is they sort of shifted the non-linearity in the sense that they changed the nonce to have this like inverse thing in the exponent, so that the signing equation itself can just be one single multiplication. So you no longer have to worry about A being at the denominator for the signing equation. And then it turns out that if you have a secret sharing of A and want to expose it to the exponent in its inverse form, there's a simple trick that you can use by Barlan and people. So it's sort of the equation of why it makes sense to rewrite ECDSA. So there are a lot of works that have emerged since then, which if I had more time I would walk through, but for the purpose of this talk, what I want to say is that each of these works makes use of some combination of rewriting ECDSA and some machinery to instantiate the rewriting in a secure way. And the thing that really sets them apart is what sort of verification machinery they use to tie everything together. And each work seems to have its own unique way of addressing this problem. And everyone has their own shortcomings, I guess. In some cases, the checks don't really generalize to multiple parties. In some cases, the checks are interactive. In some cases, it makes very non-black box use of specific machinery for, like, let's say, PI encryption or class groups or whatever. And in some cases, you have to prove things about homomorphic commitment, some level of math. I think that in most cases, the analysis is quite involved. Right? So that's kind of very standard. So what we do in this work is we identify one specific way of rewriting ECDSA that the people who introduced it called ECDSA doubles. And we show that it has this really nice structure, this particular way of rewriting, that allows for a simple statistical check that is generic, doesn't induce any extra assumptions or anything, costs nothing, relatively speaking, relative to the rest of the protocol, and has very simple statistical analysis, and it happens to just reuse different parts of the protocol and make any way for the previous ones. Right, so what is this? What are ECDSA doublets? Right? To my knowledge, this was first informally, this was implicitly used and formulated by Little and Long, and subsequently was very nicely crystallized into its own object by Haber et al. More recently, a couple of years ago. So this is the equation. This is the ECDSA equation. Let's multiply and divide by some random value phi, right? And let's separate out the numerator and the denominator. Right? The numerator is a masked version, like alpha is a masked version of the numerator, beta is a masked version of the denominator. Notice that if you divide alpha by beta, the masks cancel out and you get back to the original signature. So the cool thing is that we can basically make alpha and beta public. Right? It's safe to reveal alpha and beta intuitively because beta is a one-time pad. It's one-time pad encryption of the denominator, and alpha is uniquely specified once you fix beta and the signature itself. So this is super helpful. So at this point, the only nonlinear operations that we have to worry about are these nonlinear combinations or these multiplications of phi and these secrets as k and k. So that's cool. This is what an ECDSA double is. It's a form of correlated randomness, which basically consists of secret shares of the signing key and the nonce, the mask phi, and the mask multiplied by both of these two values, signing key and the nonce. So we can assuming that we have this correlation and assuming that we sample the nonce, there's a simple one-down information theoretic mechanism by which we can just take linear combinations of these correlated values to get the mask numerator and the mask denominator from the previous slide, and this is why we're not. Right, so this is a really nice observation by Adam et al. Right, so how do we actually generate this correlated randomness? Right? So the first part is straightforward. The secret key A and phi are just inputs, so it's basically local operations. The second part is a bit non-trivial. We now have to do this secure multiplication of K, phi, and Sk. Right? So assume that, assume for a minute that the multiplication is maliciously secure already. Right? That's a well-studied problem. What we have to do to get full malicious security for the rest of the protocol is make sure of two things. One, that this phi value is correctly reused in both the multiplications. And two, that the second value that's input, that's A or Sk, respectively, have to be the discrete logarithms of these publicly known points, R and Pk. And if you ensure these two things, this protocol is fully maliciously secure. So in previous work, this is where people have resorted to using zero-knowledge proofs, proving that ciphertexts are well-formed, proving that commitments are related in the right way, and so forth, or using max and some sort of interactive check. And what we show in this work is that it's a simple pairwise check that can verify this fact. And so I'm going to skip over the first one. Basically, verifying the consistency of phi almost comes with free by using vector OLE instead of OLE. It's not so interesting. The more interesting one is this, right? The verifying the discrete log thing. So intuitively, if you stare at this correlation for a minute, you see that the structure of the correlation is basically like a map, or it's like secret value and a map of secret value. Right? So the intuition is that we can exploit the map structure to check the correlation directly in the exponent. Right? Intuitively, rather, but essentially sort of like in the process of sampling this correlated randomness, we will already create the Rosa max and all the intermediate values. That's the idea. Here's a simplified view of this check. Let's say that the phone puts in phi and the laptop puts in k into the multiplication primitive, and they get as outputs t phi and pk that add up to the product of their inputs. Right? And now the laptop claims that its input into the multiplication is in fact the discrete logarithm of this public point. And now how do they verify this? Right? So let's take a look at their respective additive outputs in the exponent, capital D phi, capital Pk. Right? There's the little d values in the exponent. The interesting thing now is that the phone can just exploit the equation of the two-party multiplication to derive the laptop's share in the exponent locally. Right? So observe that the phone has all the information that it needs to compute capital TK, even though TK is a value that belongs to the laptop. So it turns out that capital TK sent by the laptop, if it matches the locally derived capital TK of the phone, is sufficient to check that this claim is true. Right? And this is useful because notice that the phone has received a value from the laptop that it already derived locally. So assuming that this protocol is executed honestly, the phone gets nothing, no new information about the laptop's input that it did already have. Right? And on the other hand, on the other side, we can do a quick sanity check to see that a laptop can subvert this check essentially with negligible probability. Right? The reason is as follows. Assume that there is some sort of delta offset between the laptop's claimed R value and the discrete logarithm that it actually put into the multiplier. Right? So what this happens is that what this induces is for the phone to derive some TK star value that is offset from the honest TK value by some inconvenient term. Right? In particular, the offset is phi, which is owned by the phone, multiplied by this delta value of the laptop. And given that there's no information about phi in the laptop's view, this offset is uniformly distributed in Z-cube, which is a large field. And so the probability that the laptop is able to figure out the right TK star, like the offset that it induced by making this infinite claim, is statistically negligible. It's equivalent to guessing a random field. This is like a standard Beloza map check sort of thing, but the difference is that it's in the endpoint. That's it. So there are essentially only two cases here. One is that the laptop sent an incorrect, made an incorrect claim that it did actually put in the discrete logarithm into the multiplication, and we argued that it almost certainly failed. And the other case is the laptop is honest, in which case we showed that the phone didn't get any new information because it's just checking consistency of values it already had. So the takeaway from this is that phi, while being a value used for authentication, that phi is a map, but at the same time you can also reuse phi as part of the ECDSA cloud. And so it's serving two purposes. And yeah, this is a super cheap check, right? It's at least relative to what multiplication costs. This is nothing. Right? This is a few exponentiations, just one field element, so one per point, and this can be done in parallel with multiplication as well. And that is a simplified view. If you want the full check that we do in the paper, it's basically take the previous slide and add subscripts in the right places. That's it. This is the same check between every pair of parties. So this is the overall picture of our ECDSA signing protocol. The first couple of rounds is the same as Schnorr, picking sampling a random R value. Then in parallel, we do our two-round multiplication, and then we add a new check that makes sure that we sample the ECDSA plus the correlation. Then finally, from previous work, we know that once we have this correlation, there's an information theoretic assembly phase where we can just assemble this. That's our ECDSA protocol. Alright, so now to say a bit about efficiency, unfortunately, two-party multiplication inherently requires some nonlinear crypto and some nonlinear multiplication and so on. So broadly, there are a couple of standardized ways to do this. One is a laterally homomorphic encryption, and the other is a reverse transfer. So there's trade-offs in bandwidth and computation and things, and also theoretically in terms of assumptions. Right? And we focus on a reverse transfer because, as I showed, in a lot of cases, it makes sense to optimize the computation. So I showed a couple of slides from my co-author tab to talk about our own implementation. As a point of reference, so we implemented our protocol and as a point of reference, let's see how it compares to alternatives, right? So one alternative is pi-based multiplication, right, which we got from this public library. So concretely, it seems to be like a couple of orders of magnitude faster to do OT-based multiplication rather than pi, which is the full ECDSA protocol. That's in the local setting. In fact, when we went all the way to 64 parties spread across multiple continents, and when we ran our protocol, the amount of time that it took to terminate was still significantly less than just the local computation time for like 1 instance of pi. But first, the trade-off is that, the bandwidth is lower for homomorphic encryption-based stuff, but the factor is very small. I think about 4. I think with pi, you need about 15 kilobytes per additional party. For us, it's like 50 kilobytes. We also compared with our own previous work, which has very similar underlying tools, but has way more rounds. And I guess we found what we were expecting, which is that in the WAN setting, The fact that we have way fewer rounds kind of really shines through, like the 6x faster with 54 parties. But also notice that in land setting, you don't really lose anything. Like fact that implementation got a bit faster. And so this is like basically game to see. Also, we do use this in production, and just to say a bit about like what extra overhead we have in production, we can't do things like use custom curve libraries, which is what we did for the academic thing, and we have to like maybe rely on some legacy dependencies and rely on things that are audited, get everything checked, and so on. We also have to do some like non-trivial networking that is kind of application specific, and also we have to run our benchmarks on like devices that are more representative of like daily use rather than sort of academically isolated environments. And so the scenarios that we consider, the configurations that we consider were for browser and phone, where your browser's on your laptop, you're running your web application on your laptop, and the other device that you use is your phone, so like UFA or something like this. The other is let's say you have a key share on the cloud and you have another share on your phone. In both of these scenarios, we consider the range of phone options. So like really cheap Android smartphones starting at let's say $100, so maybe like a mid-range Android smartphone, about $400. And then we also consider like a compute cluster, right? So I think completely there's a compute cluster, there's a cluster of nodes in the US that we are activating from Europe. So yeah, that's the configuration between 5 and 11 nodes. I think in all cases, we had signs considerably under 100 milliseconds. So it's maybe an order of magnitude overhead and all these like extra things that go into production. But still, this is like, I think like maybe an order of magnitude faster than the academic like 5 stuff. So it's the point of comparison. Right, so that's what I wanted to say about implementation. And in summary, we now have threshold ECDSA in 3 rounds, which matches the round complexity of the canonical Schnorr protocol. So if you have a system in which your latency is on the order of like tens of milliseconds, that means that ECDSA is going to terminate at about the same time. This is enabled by a well-chosen correlation that I spoke about and a new consistency check that we devised and analyzed. We can make use of any two-round two-party multiplication protocol to get the round complexity. Of course, with more rounds, the round complexity increases, but it's still fine in terms of security. And as an interesting side effect, we don't have to make use of any zero-knowledge proofs. But take this with a grain of salt because multiplication is slightly stronger with limited than zero knowledge, but it's a nice side effect. You can find more information about our work, about where it's used, and like libraries that are implemented and so forth at our website, ECDSA.info. And thanks to my co-author, drawing from there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think